And even today with the rain, it's refreshing, and we all can just be thankful, I suppose, for the fact that the sky is not as smoky as it was last week. So maybe the fires will be put out as well.
Yeah, tap it up a little bit.
So what I'm going to talk to you about today is how to stay engaged with nature during this quarantine time. And I think what became really obvious to me was how important it has been for me to be out just in the neighborhood and being able to walk as much as possible. And so I came up with an idea that we could just sort of go on a nature walk and find what we can find. So Mary Grace, go ahead if you want to change screen, please. First of all, I wanted to read you a poem one of my friends had written. This is Cecilia Runkle, wrote this little haiku on the autumnal equinox, which is also called the September or fall equinox. So here in the northern hemisphere, it's the beginning of fall season, and in the southern hemisphere, it's just the beginning of spring. The word equinox comes from Latin equus, meaning equal, and nox, night. On the equinox, day and night are roughly equal in length. So I believe was yesterday the first day of autumn. So trembling see-through tree, sprinkled with squashed yellow leaves, soon to be naked. Goodbye to summer, wistful loss of warm weather, yet welcome cooling. Sharply pointed leaf, painted bronze and rusty red, lying in gutter. COVID, politics, yet autumn arrives on time. Daylight wanes to dark. Turning into fall, slowly yellow-orange arrive while green leaves recede. Add blanket to bed, no longer just sheets, need warmth, cozy, fast asleep. Prepare hot soup, prepare pot of soup, steep chicken, corn, beans, salsa, smell bowls of delight. Seasons offer pause, attend to the great turning. What change will arrive? So I wanted to also give you an idea of what horticultural therapy is, because a lot of times people are wondering, well, is it truly therapy and how does it work? So I have some quotes here from the experts that horticultural therapy offers rehab and respite care for persons on a continuum from wellness care to treatment of debilitating illness and injuries. Being in nature is naturally therapeutic. Programs for rehabilitation and well-being become therapeutic when they're using specially designed horticultural activities and settings. So that could be in a hospital or a rehab center. For patients, that often means physical therapy, occupational therapy, rehab, and healing arts. They can be done out in the garden, and in some of the hospitals, this is being done. Also in different rehabilitation locations, people have access not only to passively be in the garden, but also actively involved in the garden. And that could involve as much as actually using specific tools to help them to recover from injuries. And there's a lot of different ways in which we can demonstrate that for you in the future. But for all others, such as care partners, there are opportunities for stress release and wellness and healing. And I think we would all agree that sometimes just being out in nature, there's enough stress release just by itself, but often interacting with these programs, people report that they are feeling so much better. So why is horticultural therapy important? And again, there's a lot of studies that have been done, particularly around our physical and mental health. And And I'm just going to read you a couple of quotes from that. Urban green spaces encourage physical activity and are more restorative than indoor settings, and they have a greater positive effect on our mental health. Also, exposure to a natural environment tends to foster psychological well-being and produce restoration from stresses of everyday living. Some social scientists conjecture that people respond with involuntary attention with nature, and this is a key mechanism in restoration from mental fatigue, and particularly for people who work in healthcare. Oftentimes they are just as welcomed out in these horticultural settings at various hospitals that have horticultural therapy. In one study, higher levels of exposure to green space were associated with significantly lower levels of symptoms for depression, anxiety, and stress. And the list really goes on and on about nearby nature. Even looking out the windows sometimes is better than not. So a view of trees and flowers has been proven to really reduce stress for people who are indoors. So for those of you who are not able to get out and take a walk, it's still beneficial for you to be able to look outside. And there have been hundreds of studies done. Some of them are on the University of Washington resource list. So it's good for all of us. There is a new movement towards nature prescriptions, which is kind of a fun idea, but actually doctors can be writing prescription for people to get outside for weight loss and for their heart conditions, all kinds of things where they're actually finding that that goes hand in hand with exercise and eating well. Memory care and working with people in dementia. There are also many studies about that, and long-term care facilities that they're finding that oftentimes people are stimulated to remember things about plants that they may not remember until they see those plants and are interacting with them. It also helps with our grief and loss to be out and just interacting with nature, but also with others. And then lastly, that dealing with what people are now calling caregiver burnout and compassion fatigue are also reasons why people would want to be out in nature as much as possible. So next slide, thank you. So here I actually have these, what I just read to you, quotes from some of those studies, and I'll let you just read those on your own and on the PowerPoint. Go ahead and change the slide, please. So last line, the longer term indirect impacts of nearby nature also include increased levels of satisfaction with one's home, one's job, and life in general. So these are really, all of this has more to do with just being out in nature, which is what we're talking about now in terms of going out and taking a walk. However, horticultural therapy is something that is a practice that is much more in alignment with physical therapy and psychotherapy in some cases, also occupational therapy, as I mentioned, where people are actually able to do some of those exercises in a garden setting. And it's really amazing to see the result. Thank you, Mary Grace. So I just want to encourage you to get out and take a walk around the neighborhood and see what you might find. Please don't take from anyone's yard, and ask permission before you pick. And I say all that because I'm going to show you some of the things that I found out walking in my neighborhood, including a bouquet of flowers, and I did get permission to pick. So next slide, please. So we have an activity that we call What's in Bloom. And for me, this is really one of the funnest activities because we look around and see in every season, and even in the shoulder seasons, what might still be blooming. And we see blooms here in the Pacific Northwest year round. And So what I am showing you here are just down in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a red flower. That's a dahlia from my garden. Herbs are flowering now. If you have any oregano or marjoram in your garden, you'll notice that the flowers have bloomed and now they're setting seed. Cosmos are still blooming marigolds. This light pink flower up in the top left corner is an anemone. Sunflowers also are blooming right now. I think all of us look forward to seeing the sunflowers, and they're starting to get their seeds. And then this brightest pink throughout the bouquet are asters. And this is a hybridized aster, but they are a native plant. And if you do any hiking in the Cascades, you'll see asters blooming at this time of year as well. So next slide, please. So other things that I found when I was out and about, pine cones, acorns, chestnuts, lichens, lots of leaves are falling. I have in this dark brown basket are some green beans that had gone to seed, and so I collected those, and they're still on their vines, but eventually I'll be able to replant those next spring. So what else do I have there, Grace? This wagon just shows you collecting some of these other things, branches, grasses, and different craft activities could be done with some of these pine cones and things. The green vine up in the top basket is a hop vine, and I did do some dyeing of some fabric with some hops. People sometimes like to make wreaths out of them. And then you can see I have a little weaving in the very far back with some red leaves that I stuck in the weaving loom. So I'm just wanting to invite you to play with this. You can make your own bouquet, bringing the end of summer back inside your home. You know, maybe start gathering some things, thinking about making some things for the holidays out of some of these found items as well. And this is an up close shot of the hops blossoms, and you can see that the leaves are the darker part and they're starting to dry. And there in the foreground, I have some rose hips, geranium flowers. These are green hops in the bell jar that's on the left, and then some red leaves, red and yellow leaves that I've gathered. We have that guy again. There's some hydrangea in there too, I see, for the blue. What else do we have? So I do want to tell you some things. Here are our resources, but I do want to point out a couple of other things. I think it's most kind of getting going on your walk. It would be important to think about such action words as collecting, touching, choosing, arranging, observing, engaging with nature. And I would ask you to think about how you might be able to do that in your own neighborhood. And also just having fun with whatever materials you find. I have so a lot about being out in nature is really about the sensory experience. And so like those action words state, it's really about smelling, touching, seeing, being able to even hear the sounds of leaves in the trees as the wind is blowing. And so what I'd like to invite you to do is think about where you might be able to do that. And one of the recent garden discovery walks that we did with the Memory and Brain Wellness Center, was at the Woodland Park Zoo, where they have the rose garden. And behind the rose garden is a small little new garden called the sensory garden. And Laura Rumpf and I did a tour of that garden together and pointed out what was in bloom in August and early September. So I would encourage you to go and see that. It's on your resources page. And we also have, so on YouTube, if you click on any of these things, you'll be able to see the sensory garden tour. You'll be able to also listen to some music that was played in the garden. And then lastly, I've mentioned the book Braiding Sweetgrass, which is just a fabulous book that's so poetic, and it talks about botany from the standpoint of really getting out in nature and experiencing it in a is she actually talks to the plants and has a relationship with the plants. So I encourage any of you who are interested to check out her book. So, and I guess worth pointing out with this is that Robin Wall Kimmerer has talked about finding meaning in the woods and being out in nature. And for some people, it's a pretty spiritual activity, being out and doing activities such as gardening, being with friends out in nature, making crafts and doing things outside. It can be life transforming. And so I want to just encourage you to get out as much as possible. And one final poem, The Sweet End of Summer. The summer's flower is to the summer sweet, though to itself it only live and die. But if that flower with base infection meet, the basest weed outbraves his dignity. For sweetest things turn sourest by their deeds. Lilies that fester smell far worse than weeds. It's Shakespeare. So thank you. Oh, and finally, we wanted you to see the picture of the Future Therapy Garden with the University of Washington Memory and Brain Wellness Center. This picture at the top is a schematic design for that memory garden and being able to take people outside. It's designed to enhance the lives of people living with dementia. And this group below shows a team of people that helped decide what kind of elements would be in that garden. These are social workers and healthcare workers of all different walks. And just Mary Grace is back there, Genevieve, Laura, and myself. So you might recognize some of us. We encourage you to continue to watch for that Future Therapy Garden. And thank you very much.